This is Logan Sekulow. Today on the show, we're talking about public schools, and specifically the woke public school teachers that are indoctrinating and targeting your Christian students. Today on Sekulow.
Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Logan Sekulow.
Welcome to Sekulow again. This is Logan Sekulow, third day in a row. I'm here joined by Will Haynes, executive producer of Sekulow. We are excited to talk to you today. If you want your voice heard, give us a call, 1-800-684-3110, as you may have heard in the open. Today we're talking about a few things, but mainly the wave you've probably seen in the news, and heck, as a parent, you've probably dealt with it yourself, of sort of the more progressive school leadership and teachers, and the woke movement being impressed upon your children in the schools. It's something we all have dealt with as parents. And this is a specific one that's come out of the AClj. Again, back in the 90s, when we first started, we were dealing with these cases in a much bigger scale, because you had situations at hand where specifically we would have to take these things to the Supreme Court to get decisions made. Now, 20, 30 years later, a lot of times these don't have to go to the courts. They can be handled very simply. We have all these resources on ACLJ.org because people took action 20 and 30 years ago for your students and for your kids and for your grandkids. We appreciate that. And one came out of Florida just this month, and it's pretty interesting. This is from a middle school in Florida. Again, we protect, often we'll protect the student, protect even the school, because the school took action and did the right thing. So we'll protect their identity just purely for the sake of the student, for not even for the teachers, but for the school. But this is in Florida. A middle school student had to do a monologue as part of a drama course. Will, you were in drama?
Right, yeah. I know all about these assignments. Yeah.
I went to many of Will's plays.
You didn't stay through all of them, though.
You know, they were long.
You know, why are high school plays so long?
Yeah, I don't know why we even need that intermission. Why is that necessary?
Right.
But in this, they had a monologue that you were supposed to write about yourself. So a personal monologue, not in character, not anything like that. You were supposed to create this about yourself and tell about sort of your vulnerabilities. And in this particular monologue that was written by a student, she addressed the hardship of her medical, or their medical condition. Okay, so their medical condition. The monologue ended with a discussion from the teacher, who asked, "How can you be so happy with this condition?" Of which the student then replied, "I feel Jesus accepts me for who I am, and that's what keeps me going every day." And that was a big no-no in the public school system, because this teacher, Will, had some rules. And her rules, not only completely unconstitutional, silencing kids, you don't abandon your freedom of speech by walking in the schoolhouse doors, but specifically was told, that doesn't fly here in my school, in my classroom. Sorry, you're not allowed to bring your religious, personal, talk about yourself personally, but leave out the most important part.
The teacher had the student rewrite the assignment with no religious reference because of this classroom policy. That the teacher explained, "I also have guidelines about ethnic and racial stereotypes, which are a part of my explanation to students if they ever write something that could be offensive to someone's belief system. If you make a religious reference, it could offend a student." So not only is there a no religious reference policy, which is against the First Amendment of the Constitution that your dad has defended for decades, but she also compares it to racial or ethnic stereotypes policy.
But just having a religious reference, and in this, a positive religious reference, something that helps someone with a specific medical condition get through the day. Look, we're going to talk about this and a lot more of what's going on in the schools, how we fought back with the school choice initiative that we rolled out last year during the COVID-19 crisis. And look, not all schools are even open right now. We've seen New York start to reopen. We've seen people start to reopen as we head towards the end of the school year. But look, I know you've probably dealt with this as well in your own public school or even in your private schools. I want to hear from you. 1-800-684-3110. Tell us about your stories and what you did to fight back. I want to hear from you, or if you have any questions about these specific policies. Maybe you've dealt with it and you've decided not to push back because you thought they knew they were right. You thought they were right, but they weren't. 1-800-684-3110. Give us a call right now. We'll be right back with more on Sekulow.
I was at a board meeting at Youth for Jesus, and the executive director said, we've got a case. The Supreme Court had just granted review. It was about literature distribution at airports.
We wanted to have the Bible study meet in the school, but it turned into a problem when the principal said, no, you can't have it.
I told her that I wanted to sing Noel, and she said, the principal said that we can't have anything to do with Christ in our songs.
We marched around the country defending evangelism in Chicago, in Boston, in New York, Atlanta, Texas, Southern California, Northern California, and points in between.
We got a letter one evening from the IRS saying they wanted all this information that we all knew immediately was not right.
How do you fight the government? How do you fight the IRS?
Tea Party groups say they're being targeted by the Internal Revenue Service, and they're enlisting the aid of the American Center for Law and Justice.
They were trying to shut groups down that they disagreed with. This was very, very serious.
The federal courts do not need to become monitors of state trespass actions, and that's all this is.
We were looking for the right to speak our minds and our consciences, and we won that right today.
Religious persecution is a situation where your life is literally put in jeopardy simply because of what you believe.
Can you help? Can you do something? He's on death row, and so we launched an international campaign. His freedom now rests solely on diplomatic efforts by the United States government and world leaders dedicated to human rights.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
There was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, we're really out of Turkey and free again.
Sekulow again with Will Haynes. Stan Bennett is in Washington, D.C., and we're talking about this current issue with sort of the woke progressive push in public schools, and heck, I'll say this, in private schools as well. Be careful. If you're a private school student, and you're a private school student, still look through those materials. Because, look, stuff happens. We hear stories all the time. Our phone lines have lit up because guess what? A lot of people have a lot of similar situations to what happened here in Florida. And to recap, in Florida, during a drama class, acting class, during a drama in middle school in Florida, Florida, students were asked to prepare a monologue. They're asked to prepare a monologue based on their own personal situation. And in this particular monologue was written by a student who addressed the hardship of their medical condition. I want to say this right, make sure that we get it right. Again, we protect the identity on here. The monologue ended with a discussion. It was, how can you be so happy with this condition? And the speaker answered, I feel Jesus accepts me for who I am, and that's what keeps me going. And then we had the response from the teacher saying, sorry, no religious talk in my classroom. We don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And therefore, even though this is part of your complete right, you can't talk about Jesus here, even in this sort of a passing. Of course, what happened? They go to ACLJ.org. They find out all this information. They take it to the principal and to the school. And guess what? No longer having an issue.
That's right. And because we have the extensive knowledge and workload in this area, when a family like this comes to the ACLJ, a lot of times it's just an assistance. We don't even have to represent them legally before the school board or a demand letter. So in this instance, we were able to give the information to the parent. The parent can then go to in this case, it was the vice principal, who immediately agreed the teacher's personal guidelines for the classroom were in clear violation of the school board policy. So this is a good win. The ACLJ is able to assist the family. Good win, quick, not a demand letter needed here, and we get the right outcome.
And we've been fighting for students for 30 years, Stan, and it's something that people don't maybe understand because maybe they don't hear as much of us talking about these things because like we did the hard work 30 years ago to get these cases taken care of 20 years ago. Obviously, if a case comes up and we need to take it one step forward, we're there for you at ACLJ. But there are real man hours that goes into this kind of content that we're able to provide to people. And guess what? Didn't have to be a big stink. Obviously, we're talking about it, but they took it to the heads of the school. It got taken care of immediately because they were able to get a document in hand and go, oh, clearly we're violating this student's rights. Boom, done, moving on. But we are seeing this continually. Will, you brought up even one with Planned Parenthood. We obviously know Planned Parenthood has been in the schools for decades and decades, and we'll talk about that coming up. But then we've been doing this for years, and even as recently as last year, pivoting to our school choice initiative.
Yeah, in so many of these cases, Logan, the law really is settled on these issues because of the work that we've done over the last several decades. But look, that doesn't mean the law is automatically applied. And this goes back to your point about parental involvement. We preach this on this broadcast very frequently. Your rights can only be implemented if you are involved in your student's education. Fully agree with you, Logan. That's true whether it's public or private education. You've got to know what's in the curriculum. You've got to know your rights. And by the way, if you don't know what your rights are, we can help with that as well. Under the resources tab at ACLJ.org, you can find that information. But here's the reality. Sometimes, even when you know your rights, even when you present them, you are going to have to take action to protect your students. That's when you can fill out the form for legal assistance. And like Will said, that doesn't always mean running to court. Sometimes that means us just getting involved and informing the school exactly what that settled law is that we fought for. Logan, I just say this. We're privileged to have engaged in those fights, but they only make a difference when the parent actually either allows us to assist or when they actually know that these kind of situations are happening.
And as well, the experience that the ACLJ has dealing with these, when it's a child relationship with a school, sometimes a parent may be hesitant. Like, I don't want to put my child out there as the poster child for fighting back against the school district, because that can be a difficult situation.
Yeah, a lot of times those kids have to stay in those schools.
That's why a lot of times it is just a parent getting the information, going to the administrator that can help. And when they see the information, it's a quick change and there's no pressure. And that's why, once again, you said the identity of the student in this story is very much guarded and there's not a lot of details about the individual, because we want to provide information and help in the most careful way possible to ensure that it's still a good education experience for the child going forward.
And look, you can do that if you have an issue and you think there could be specifically these type of topics that the ACLJ covers. As they had said, go to aclj.org/help. And guess what? You'll be connected with an attorney pretty much immediately. And you're going to hear from them if you're having these kind of issues. And look, there are certain things obviously within the scope of our business, and there's some things that are not within the scope of what the ACLJ does. But guess what also? This may sound like an infomercial, but when you do that, you connect with a lawyer, you have no cost to you. That's why we have ACLJ members. That's why we have people who support the American Center for Law and Justice. That's why we're in a matching challenge right now. Because when you give that $10, it becomes $20 from someone matching it on the other side. It goes to pay for this type of work. So the burden doesn't fall on a parent who says, I don't want my kid to have to suffer consequences because they say, I got Jesus in my heart. That is really where we're living right now in sort of the whole society. And again, you've probably seen it on the news. You've probably seen Christian schools that are even doing this type of thing. There's still a freedom of speech. There's still a freedom of expression, and we can talk about it and we can discuss it, but you can also get real legal help. Whether it's, as Will said, sometimes it's simple as sending a letter, which is what this was, sending a letter. Or even for the actual parent to just say, here are the resources, here are the facts. We're able to do that, connect with teachers, connect with everyone, connect with students. Because look, I'll be honest, I'm always the one, I want to protect the students. Because I think they are the ones who suffer the consequences here. A lot of parents who can't read through every material that their kids are given. I feel for those people who have to trust the public school to do their job. But when a parent has enough gumption to stand up and say there's a problem here, you got to give it to them, and we got to help them out a lot. And Will, you brought up this situation with Planned Parenthood. That's something that we're also dealing with constantly, which is indoctrination in the schools on stuff that you feel is inappropriate, and that you have control as a parent to decide, somewhat at least, what your kid learns. And I've heard crazy stories. I've been a part of crazy stories in the school. I got kids in school. There's sometimes they come home with stuff and I'm having to explain things late at night as my kids are falling asleep and they have a random question that throws me, I'm sure it throws you as a parent, completely off guard, catches you off guard, and you don't know where you're going with it because they've heard something in school. Maybe it's from a curriculum that even the school didn't even know they were teaching. Had that happen as well. A lot of times they sign up for these services. They get a curriculum. They get a book that's available, especially on these online services. If your students are now virtual or even if they're doing online programs, and they're learning about things that you would never expect. And Planned Parenthood, as always, in the public school. And this was an interesting one because the school board, what you would say, put out a letter to parents saying, hey, Planned Parenthood's come to speak. Just give you guys a heads up. You can sign a permission letter. Almost doing their due diligence. The parent said, hey, well, yeah, okay, that's fine. Are they going to be talking about abortion? And what happened?
So this is in New York last year. This is the Clarence Central School District. The director of health invited Planned Parenthood to give a presentation on their services offered. So, as you said, a permission slip goes home because this is Planned Parenthood coming to speak. And it lists to the parents that the presentation covers information about STIs, getting tested, birth control, and many other services will be mentioned. So they give kind of a broad caveat at the end.
Yeah.
Well, the parent had a question. Okay,
yeah,
this is
big
Planned
one that
Parenthood.
everyone knows is Planned Parenthood's number one, source of income.
So the parent said, I want to see the presentation, and I want to know if this is covered. She was denied by the director of health, by the superintendent, and by the principal. Well, she reached out to the ACLJ. ACLJ stepped in, gave her our memorandum on parental rights, which you can find at aclj.org, and also gave her information about the parent's right to know under the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, PPRA, U.S. Code 20, Section 1232H. And she went back. The school board then gave her the information. Guess what was covered? Abortion.
Of course.
And she pushed and said, you know what? You actually need to amend this permission slip because this is a big deal and parents may decide to sign it or not based off of this. And they agreed. They said, okay, you know what? We've been having this presentation and never had a problem, but you're right. We'll add this to it. So that's a small win, even though we don't want Planned Parenthood necessarily in the school indoctrinating.
No,
but it's a win.
It's sadly the truth. And Than, you brought this up. The school may not even know what's in these things. They may just be so scared and intimidated. It's a lot of times we've dealt with these schools. They don't necessarily want to get involved in censoring religious speech or bringing Planned Parenthood in, but they're so scared that it ends up backfiring on them because they decide we're going to try to protect everybody, try to protect our own self-interest, and it ends up blowing up in their face.
Yeah, sometimes the school is hostile, Logan. Other times they just don't know the law and or they're being intimidated by someone else with an agenda. Look, a lot of times a school is actually grateful when they are armed by the law, when we can tell them, no. Not only do you have this option, you're actually obligated under the law to provide this freedom. Logan, many times they're very happy to obligate.
Okay, we're going to take some calls on this coming up, 1-800-684-3110. If you're on hold right now, I'm going to get to you coming up in the next segment. Then we're going to talk about some other topics as well in the second half hour of Sekulow. We appreciate all of you who are chiming in because I really think this is an important topic of today. We've all dealt with it. If you're a young parent, you've dealt with it. If you're an older parent, you probably dealt with it as well. I want to hear your stories, your thoughts, your comments, your concerns. 1-800-684-3110. We'll be right back with more on Sekulow. Support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org.
For 30 years, the American Center for Law and Justice has been dedicated to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms. Because of you, we've seen great success in the courts and Congress concerning the issues that matter most to you and your families. ACLJ Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow.
Our decades-long commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law is at the center of everything we do. The bottom line, our work could not take place without your generous support.
It's a critical time for our nation and our world. With so many challenges facing our country, the work of the American Center for Law and Justice has never been more important. There's no better way to support the ACLJ than through online giving.
We truly appreciate your financial support. Without it, it would be impossible to do our work here and around the globe. And the best way to support our work is to make your financial gifts online at aclj.org.
Donating online is safe and secure, and an online gift at aclj.org can be put to work immediately, enabling the ACLJ to continue the battle against abortion giant Planned Parenthood.
These are our young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
To protect Christians facing persecution.
Release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
We're grateful to ACLJ who put it out to these people, they were getting all this out.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
To stand up for our good friend Israel. to work to uncover the corrupt deep state in Washington, and so much more. Take part in our matching challenge today. You can make a difference in the work we do. Give a gift today online at ACLJ.org.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Again, this is Logan Sekulow with Will Haynes and Thad Bennett, and we are talking about all of what's going on in the schools. We got a lot of calls. I want to go ahead and lead with those. Let's go to first Joanna, who's calling in Florida with issues I think a lot of people are dealing with. Joanna, you're on the air.
Oh, hello. Yes, I am in Fort Myers, and my 10-year-old fifth grader was in his social studies class, and the teacher, in late March, after the impeachment was over, with Trump, said that Trump was doing unconstitutional things and he was causing the riot on January 6th, and he was causing his followers to do unconstitutional things, and as a result, these are words for word, the Democrats had to step in and rescue the United States.
Yeah, and that's a fifth grader in public school in Florida, also. In Florida, where half of your base, half of your student body is probably their families likely voted for President Trump. I mean, just looking at the pure numbers here. And that's in Florida, and that's an issue that's come up. These are not, again, as Will said, isolated to these specific. We're bringing up these specific issues, whether it's the Planned Parenthood presentation or whether that is the situation in Florida with the drama coach or drama teacher. We're bringing these up specifically because these are the real issues at hand, but they're not isolated. They're everywhere, and they're in your public school, they're in your private school, and it's not just about the political opinion, which, by the way, I do have a pretty big problem with that. Look at your school. See if they have even policies. A lot of times they do. A lot of times they have social media policies as well that they're keeping their teachers under. But guess what? Sometimes those aren't policed. Maybe you need to do some of the policing there as well. Keep an eye on what people post. I've seen it happen in schools that I've been associated with over the years. When working on this for 30 years, there are a lot of times, as Than pointed out, the school is unaware of what's going on. The school didn't do the simple Google search of the people that they hired. And that is truly what happens in a lot of schools across our country. It's easy to have a resume, to have a little, slick presentation, but then no one did a little quick dive to see who this person was, checked out their social media, and realized they're going to be not only indoctrinating kids politically, but maybe into views and things that are not even accurate. Look, I've heard of stories here locally where you had fifth and sixth graders who were told that the moon landing was faked from their teachers. And look, you may agree with that. However, guess what? It's a historical fact at this point that the moon landing happened.
You're going to get some people fired up today, Logan.
I know. Look,
going into the moon landing.
I'm just specifically saying there are teachers out there that are going rogue and are teaching their students things that are absolutely absurd and are conspiracy theories on both sides. And how about we stop politicizing the public school system? Maybe Planned Parenthood shouldn't be in the schools. Maybe there's other better ways to teach about, sexual education than having Planned Parenthood, the leading abortion provider, just bringing controversy to your school for the heck of it. Maybe there are better ways to do this. And that's what we at the ACLJ do, is we create better ways. We also provide, a lot of different options. And that's one of the things we're doing with school choice. But look, elections have consequences. Last year, we talked about school choice, Than. It was a big deal. It was something that was happening. We are moving forward. Obviously, we're still moving forward on it. But there are certain political parties and political politicians that don't seem to be too keen on the fact that a student in their education outweighs a teacher in their union.
Yeah, honestly, Logan, I think it's really important to lay the issue that we're talking about today against that backdrop, the backdrop of school choice, because as we come out of this pandemic, there are more and more parents across the nation who do want greater choice in where their student gets an education. And Logan, we talked about this several weeks ago, but when the last COVID stimulus bill was passed, one of the provisions that was snuck into that bill was actually a prohibition on any states making a change in their tax code that would reduce tax revenue. Now, that sounds very complicated. Let me just put it to you this way. If a state out there decides that they want to push forward a school choice provision and maybe provide tax credits for scholarships so that parents can have choice of where their child goes to school. Logan, that will be prohibited for the next 4 years because it will be interpreted as a state tax cut. We are in court right now. There's going to be a hearing next week in Ohio where Ohio has challenged this provision. Logan, we filed a brief on behalf of 74 members of Congress, 19 senators, 55 members of the House, arguing that this is constitutional. And this is one of the main reasons. If states want to provide school choice, Logan, they ought to be able to do it. That is an authority that is reserved to the states. And come next week, it's going to be on the docket in Ohio, and we're going to be in court alongside members of Congress fighting for it.
Absolutely. Look, we're going to get into that. We're going to keep talking about this. We are going to move into other topics. We're talking about what's going on in Iran. We're talking about sort of the U.S. dealings with Iran. We're going to move forward with that in the next segment coming up as we reset the show. But I do want to talk specifically about this because we've had a lot of calls come in. And I know some of you guys were on hold for a while because we were talking. If you want to call in right now, 1-800-684-3110. Again, 1-800-684-3110. Be on the air. Discuss these issues with us. But also go to aclj.org/help if you need legal assistance. Not just always, as Will said, legal help. Sometimes you don't need to be filing a lawsuit. Sometimes we can handle it a lot faster. Just go to aclj.org/help or just go to aclj.org right now. And look, those legal services are provided at no cost to you because of people who are listening and people who go to our social media and people who go to the website and support financially the work of the American Center for Law and Justice. We are there for you because of people like you who give $5, $10, $20, whatever they can to help support, in this instance, students who are standing up for their faith or against things like Planned Parenthood coming into their schools. And we're able to fight back because of you. Right now, we're in the middle of a matching challenge, and I encourage you all to go to aclj.org, support the work we do. And a matching challenge means, you've heard me say it a million times, but I want you to understand, there is some person on the other end of this that said, hey, look, I want to match. So whatever someone gives, I'm there for you. And usually it's a group of people that say, hey, we want to help praise this much money. We'll match it as long as you get the donation on the other side. So effectively, it takes your $10, it turns it into $20. It takes your $100, turns it into $200. It takes your $1,000, turns it into $2,000. It's pretty amazing. And we really couldn't do it without the support. Again, it's a tax deductible gift. ACLJ.org. Find out more information there. As I said, give us a call. Also, if you're watching on social media, as we head towards the end of this second half hour, if you're watching you're like, hey, I'm not right now in a place where I can give financially. I get that. Guess what? There's easy, free ways you can help support the work we do. If you're watching on YouTube right now, which I know thousands of people will inevitably watch this video on YouTube, guess what you can do? Just click that thumbs up. That's all I'm asking. If you're watching right now, click that like, essentially, that thumbs up. What that does is that helps get this show and the work of our channel and everything we do at ACLJ, and subscribe, obviously. But all it does is help get that number and those eyeballs to see it. People who would never see this kind of content, it gets it into their homepage. They're able to check out what we're doing here because people said, yes, this is something I approve of. So I appreciate you doing that. If you're watching on Facebook, definitely give it a like. Make sure you're liking the pages. Also share this kind of content because it grows and grows exponentially. And the work we get to do and the people we get to reach, all of the students, all of the teachers, all the people who need protection, we're there for. And a lot of times they may not know we exist. But with people like you supporting the work that we do, again, whether it's financially through aclj.org or specifically just sharing, liking, promote. We live in kind of a share society. I encourage you to do it. You can follow us on all social media platforms. Follow my brother, my dad, myself. We are all over the place. And check it out. Again, a lot of that's on aclj.org, and I appreciate it. Coming up, we're going to talk a little bit more about Iran. We're going to keep moving into this discussion on school choice and the real choices you have as a parent of a student who's dealing with this kind of mess that we're all kind of dealing with as young parents. So we're talking about that more. The second half hour of Sekulow coming up right after this. If you don't get it, check it out. We're live right now online. ACLJ.org, Facebook, and YouTube.
Here's what I want to say to our ACLJ members, or for those of you that enjoy watching this broadcast. Whether it is going after the deep state, whether it is litigation that we're engaged in, whether it is defending the persecuted church and getting individuals out of prison because of their faith in other countries, whether it's training lawyers to fight for religious liberty, not just here in the United States, but around the globe, whether it is producing a daily, 5 days a week, 1-hour live television and radio broadcast heard on thousands of radio stations, on TV platforms, on social media platforms. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. We want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ. And when you do that, you're supporting our production teams, our videos, whether it's that kind of production and other things that we are working on. The ACLJ is front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Go to ACLJ.org.
Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. And now your host, Logan Sekulow.
This is Logan Sekulow, joined by Will Haynes, Than Bennett, and now Colonel Wes Smith, who's joining us. Thanks for being here. Yeah, we're going to talk about what's happening with the U.S. in our dealings with Iran, how quickly things have moved in the last 4 months. It's pretty wild. We're going to talk about that coming up. I knew we do have some phone calls. Was that call gone? Did we lose them? All right, we'll move forward. We'll move forward with topics. If you do have a question related to school choice or related to any issues you've had with sort of the woke public school teachers, maybe indoctrinating your kids in a way that you don't feel is appropriate, I still want to hear from you. Give us a call, 1-800-684-3110. We'll all deal with that a little bit later. But right now, Will, let's pivot to what's going on in our dealings. As we said, the Iran nuclear deal, something that we talked about. It feels like we've talked about it for the last 25 years, but we had 4 years where things were going okay, and stuff is shifting.
Well, there's a little bit of an update because we talked earlier in last week also about the talks in Vienna where the United States is there and having indirect talks with the Iranians through the other nations that were part of the JCPOA. We've talked about how this is not a good idea for us to get back into, but how it does seem that the Biden administration is dead set on getting back into this deal with the Iranians. And we also learned that the Iranians were now enriching uranium at 60% as opposed to the 5% set by the JCPOA, which is just a short jump away from 90%, which is weapons-grade uranium at that point.
Wes, maybe you can discuss this and tell me. We've heard about this deal for a long time. Mm-hmm. It goes back and forth. Why, as America, put yourself in the shoes of the Biden administration? Yeah. Why do they think this is a positive? Why do they think this is something we have to do as America to get into this deal with Iran?
It defies logic. It really does. I think, and it's crazy that they would put national security and actually the peace of the world at stake for this, but it has to do with their narrative that somehow they accomplished this great, geopolitical achievement during the Obama administration. Ned Price said yesterday that the U.S. and Iran have a common goal of restoring the Iran nuclear deal, even though that deal is a strategic blunder. It does not stop Iran on its pathway to a nuclear weapon. It delayed it for 10 years. Right. It does not demand that they stop exporting terrorism, never mentioned it in the agreement. It doesn't restrict their research and development on ballistic missiles, which is what they need to carry a nuclear weapon, even though the United Nations has said you can't do that, not mentioned in the JCPOA. And of course, there's no requirement in the agreement that Iran stop calling for the absolute destruction of everyone who lives in the nation of Israel. None of that is there, so it defies common sense. And yet, according to Ned Price, the Biden State Department, we are in agreement with Iran that it needs to be restored. And one other quick thing I want to read to you. This is from President Rouhani of Iran. America and the world will have to kneel before our great nation and give up their oppressive sanctions. Indeed, we have moved a step forward and achieved a great victory. The people who impose sanctions on us are fully admitting that now, due to the steadfastness of our people, the sanctions and the pressure have led nowhere. That's their president, and yet we are negotiating with them today.
It sounds hilarious. It sounds like you're talking. It doesn't even sound like a real quote from a real.
It sounds like from a movie.
Right. It feels like something from a movie that you would not take seriously. Yeah. That someone would write it and you'd go, well, no foreign leader would actually say this. But these are the kind of countries that you're dealing with, the kind of leadership that you're dealing with. And we are just, kind of bowing down to them once again. This reminds me of what we talked about even with the border. Like they won't say the magic word of crisis. We get caught up in these, like you said, their narrative that make no logical sense, that don't support our allies, that don't support anything that we're doing here in America. But it sounds nice to say we came up with an agreement when really these are one-way streets. We're restricting ourselves and inevitably going to hurt. I mean, look, I said this before. What was going to happen coming up? We saw ISIS get destroyed. We saw the Middle East pretty calm for 4 years.
Abraham Accords.
The Abraham Accords. Yeah. And guess what's back? What's back is statements like that and leadership that don't understand how to take the Middle East seriously. This is where we're dealing with. It's what we're going to have to keep an eye on. And we've got to protect ourselves. Okay, it could get rough. Okay, watch out. At ACLJ.org, we're fighting back. Go to ACLJ.org right now. Some phone calls are coming in right now, and I want to hear from you as well. 1-800-684-3110.
After accusing Israel of attacking the Natanz nuclear facility last week, Iran moved to increase its uranium enrichment.
Mohammad Javad Zarif says Israel is mistaken if it thinks the attack would derail hopes of reviving the 2015 nuclear deal.
The danger here is that we're going to give Iran what it most wants, which is an end to the economic pressure on them before we get anything out of them in the way of ending their nuclear program.
We think that maybe the talks have reached a state where parties can begin working on a mutual draft text. The writing of the text can begin at least in the areas that mutual agreement exists.
The U.S. is talking about a stronger and longer deal and about having Iran come into compliance first before there was ever any potential sanctions relief. Those talking points seem to be dropped altogether, whereas the Iranians continue to insist that the U.S. needs sanctions relief up front. So if we had to liken this to a game, I'd say it's a game of nuclear chicken.
Pleased that Iran has continued to agree to engage in discussions, in direct discussions with us and with our partners on how we move forward and what is needed to allow us to move back into the JOPCA so that we're part of it again, that we should have never gotten out of, in my view.
Iran hasn't given up on these talks because they badly need them to start working again. Without the U.S. rejoining the JCPOA, Iran's economy is just not going to revive itself.
Here in Jerusalem, the Diplomatic Security Cabinet met on Sunday. The ministers reportedly are concerned the Biden administration wants a nuclear deal at all costs.
I'm worried that we are once again going to be too eager to reach an agreement, and we're going to have a bad agreement that will compromise our security and the security of our allies in the region, including Israel and most of the Arab world.
Welcome back to Sekulow. I'm Logan Sekulow, joined by Will Haynes, Stan Bennett in Washington, D.C., and Colonel Wes Smith. And we are talking about, Will, what's going on in Iran and a new Iran nuclear deal. Is it essentially the same? Do they redraft it? Do we rework it? Or is this just goes right back to the Obama era policy?
Well, what it does seem is that the Iranians are going to get a lot of sanctions relief if the Biden administration does get back into this deal. But we have that bite from Ned Price, that's the spokesperson for the State Department, when asked about this by a reporter. So let's go ahead and play bite 2.
Any comments on Iranian President Rouhani's comment? He said today that the talks in Vienna have progressed by about 60 to 70%. He added, if Americans act within the framework of honesty, we will achieve results in a short time.
Well, before I get to that, I would just say generally that the talks have continued in Vienna, as we know. The United States and Iran, we have together a stated common objective of returning to mutual compliance with the JCPOA.
Wes, that was just from Ned Price.
Yes.
I know you can't hear right now because we didn't give you headphones, which is my fault.
It's on us.
He said that we together stand common objective of returning to mutual compliance with the JCPOA. Mm-hmm. Again, I keep hearing mutual compliance, and I can't help but think the mutual side of this, it is not going both ways.
No, it is not mutual. And not only that, even if it were mutual, let's say Iran's really going to come to the plate now, they have a long history, even with the original JCPOA, of cheating on it. They were hiding their nuclear research and development underground. Israel went in and found a warehouse full of documents on their R&D for nuclear weapons. I mean, the list goes on and on. They are not credible people to deal with. They've lied and cheated for all of these years, yet we're going in acting like they are honest brokers, and they're absolutely not. And now in Vienna, where these talks have been going on indirectly, the EU announced yesterday that they are establishing a third working group which will sequence how we're going to relieve sanctions.
And maybe we also need to explain that too. What's going on in Vienna?
So in Vienna, we have these
people keep saying, you keep hearing
indirect talks, right?
In Vienna. Well, what's happening in Vienna?
So in Vienna, we have these indirect talks that are going on between the United States is talking with the other members of the JCPOA. So that would be Russia, China, the European Union, members of those countries. And then those countries are also having direct talks with Iran. But because the United States and Iran are not at a level where we will directly talk, it's called shuttle diplomacy, where they'll talk with one side, they'll run over and tell the Iranians something that said, they'll respond. It's basically like a nuclear game of telephone. So it's pretty dangerous if you can imagine the high stakes of this game. Yeah. But that's what's going on. And to call back to what Wes had mentioned and what also the question to the State Department spokesperson was that Hassan Rouhani, the president of Iran, said the talks in Vienna have progressed about 60 to 70%. So about the same as their enrichment of their uranium. And if the Americans act within the framework of honesty, we will achieve results in a short time. When you couple that statement where the Iranians are coming from this position of strength now that they didn't have for the last 4 years, with what Ned Price said when he referred to common mutual compliance, a common objective of mutual compliance, actually seems like our government is placing us on the same level as the Iranians. Instead of us saying, Iranians, stop doing bad things and we'll lift sanctions, it says we want to come to a common objective of mutual compliance, basically saying we're not in compliance either. So let's just get back to even and figure this out.
Yeah, I can't take that when it's positioned that way. I mean, you know exactly what we're dealing with here. This is not this kind of relationship. Shouldn't be this kind of relationship.
No, and here's the thing. The real bottom line, Logan, is this will absolutely, even if they go back to it, it will not stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Right. And they already are doing the research and development. They've launched satellites into the atmosphere, so they have the ballistic technology to deliver the weapon, and this will do nothing to stop it. But let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say they got rid of all the centrifuges and they really said, we're going to be an honest broker in this thing, an honest partner. Even if they got rid of what they've done so far, the enriched uranium that they're stockpiling and all the extra centrifuges to enrich the uranium, there's no way to take away from them the technical capability and the knowledge that they've gained over the last few years. So they can still, go immediately to research and development and produce a nuclear weapon. And just last week, nuclear experts, including those on the International Atomic Energy Agency, said that the breakout time for Iran, because of all the research they've done and how they've cheated over the last several years, the breakout time for them to go from a 0 point to producing one nuclear bomb has gone from 18 months to a matter of a few months. That's where we are today.
Yeah, for political theater at some point, they could inevitably hurt us.
Yes.
And it will inevitably hurt the American people potentially if we continue on this. For us to make it just seem like we're rushing into agreement, that's exactly what Joe Lieberman said, actually. Let's go to hear from Joe Lieberman. Kind of summarizes everything that I'm trying to tell you here on Sekulow today, Bite 23.
I'm worried that we are once again going to be too eager to reach an agreement, and we're going to have a bad agreement that will compromise our security and the security of our allies in the region, including Israel and most of the Arab world.
Yeah, at this point, this is most of the Arab world and Israel are allies, and we're risking it, and we're risking their protection and inevitably our protection because it sounds nice on paper, and that's where you have to stop and just look at this from a big picture and say, why is this important? And that's why I brought that up. Why is this the number one thing we got to jump back into? Because their plan is to reverse everything that's been done the last 4 years, and which could send us right back into a spiral in the Middle East.
Yeah, and, it used to be that our big concern was the security of Israel.
Yeah. That's gone.
It's Israel now, but it's also the Arab nations and the Gulf states there. They have become truly allies to us. and allies with Israel, and they know that their security is also on the line. Plus, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, then you have, the proliferation issue so that the other Gulf states, in order to protect themselves, will also pursue nuclear weapons. This is the beginning of some dominoes falling that truly are a strategic blunder, as I said. And yet it appears the United States State Department, the Biden administration, is intent on doing this.
Right. And there are ways we can fight back then. And there are things that are happening right now on Capitol Hill that are being introduced. I want you to tell people what they can do, not necessarily what they can do, but what people that they support politically. Again, we said elections have consequences. And sometimes your point of view is not in the majority. But there are people always there fighting for a lot of our voices.
Well, I think on this issue, Logan, you've got to look at lawmakers who are willing to look at the facts on the ground, the facts that Wes has been laying out. Because, look, I think this administration has already decided to rejoin this deal. I mean, it's a foregone conclusion. What's happening now in Vienna is just political theater. I think that's what you called it. I certainly agree with that. Today, literally, maybe as we speak, Logan, it was about to start as we came on air. Our own Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, is on Capitol Hill, actually partnering with the chairman of the House Republican Study Committee, Jim Banks, who, by the way, also is co-leading that brief we talked about in Ohio with us, so a good friend of this broadcast. They are introducing, Logan, a piece of legislation called the Maximum Pressure Act. Essentially what it would do, it would codify the sanctions that were put in place under the Trump administration. Now, look, it can't pass without the president's support, but here's the truth, Logan. Here's why it's important that Secretary Pompeo is there and advancing the mission. This has to get in front of the American people. They have to see the plain truth, the facts on the ground, and the fact that this administration has decided to rejoin the JCPOA without any facts, Logan. I think that's the importance of today's announcement on Capitol Hill.
Sure. Maybe we can post about that, kind of explain to people what's going on. Maybe we can hear from Pompeo himself specifically on why he's supporting them. Sure we can. Let's try to get that done. I do want to say this. If you have your voice on this, and specifically how the Biden administration is handling our dealings with the Middle East, we got one more segment coming up after this, and I want to hear from you. That's right, 1-800-684-3110. How you feel the Biden administration's been doing the last 3 months in terms of the Middle East? Seen any flare-ups? Seen any issues? I think we all have. I think we all could speak to that. Will, I know you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I did just want to ask Thayan, because sometimes on these issues, when it's national security and Iran, we can see some bipartisan support. Is there any chance of getting some members of the House to join this bill that are Democrats? I know that it's an uphill battle because it's not going to get past a veto-proof majority to override a veto of the president. But could we see some Democrats join in with this common sense language?
You know, honestly, it's an uphill battle in this atmosphere. I think you do have members of the Democrat Party in the House that agree with it philosophically, Will, but they're going to be under a lot of pressure from the Biden administration. I don't think it's probably likely to actually happen. But look, even if it doesn't, their voters need to know where they stand on this. And I'll tell you, Will, I think it's important to talk to Republicans and Democrats because, remember, it was a Republican Senate that disarmed itself on the original deal.
All right. You heard it from the man himself. That's just where we're at. It's just true. Look, sometimes these things don't go very far, but at least you have your voice being heard by someone. Trust me, the President Biden, certainly will hear from you. And he wants to hear from you, and I want to hear from you about his work in the Middle East. I want to hear from him right now. So give me a call, 1-800-684-3110. Telephone screener, get a little looser. 1-800-684-3110. I want to hear your voice on the air. We'll be right back.
It was reported by Iran's chief nuclear negotiator that their uranium enrichment, which under the JCPOA, that's the Iran agreement, was supposed to be at 5%. That's for medical use, generating power. Well, now you're at a 5 alarm because their negotiators saying they're at 60%.
This also comes as indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran over the 2015 nuclear deal are set to resume later this week.
The reason that the JCPOA, as flawed as it was, limited to them to 5% enriched uranium is because at 5%, that you can do all of your civilian power work, your medical research and tests. All of that is done at the 5% level. There is really no use for any uranium above 5% for civilian or medical power purposes.
Iran has already broken through at 20%. And what has been the response of Western powers?
Iran demands the U.S. act first by removing sanctions before it will agree to make any moves limiting its nuclear advancement.
I don't know how the notion of a deal that Iran violates anyway actually preserves peace in the area. And it just seems to be almost a legacy item. They just think we need to negotiate a deal with Iran, so let's negotiate one.
You cannot negotiate with the government of Iran. These are not negotiable people. These are terrorists.
Well, this is now evidence that the Europeans should be very upset that for the last several years, big surprise, Iran has been lying to us about centrifuges and enrichment. Two issues of incredible concern.
It's bad for securing American freedom. It's bad for our friends in Israel, and it's bad for our Gulf state allies throughout the Arab world as well.
Here's the problem. 90%, it's a weapon. Let me tell you what the uses are at 60%. Getting ready to be a weapon.
Segment of the show for today, and I'm giving our phone screener work today. Obviously, 1-800-684-3110, trying to get some of these calls and comments up about this issue, and also still dealing with how the ACLJ works specifically with helping out students and teachers. Let's take that call off the bat. Carolyn's been holding for a long time, and then we'll move on to some more topics. I know a lot of you guys are calling about specifically the Middle East and Iran, but let's move back to the first segment of the show where we talked about what was going on with sort of the woke public school teachers and how we've been working at this, not for the last few months, not for the last few years, for the last 30 plus years. And Carolyn, you're on the air.
Hi, Logan. Okay, so this story goes back to the 90s.
A better time.
We got, wait, well, you said that you've been doing it for 30 years. I can vouch for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
We got into trouble with our high school over about that we had permission to have. The principal walked into the meeting, said, break it up, do not do this again, or we will suspend you. I went home, told my grandparents what happened. They reached out to ACLJ, which I will say this, back in the 90s, Jay Sekulow was it. You did not have a ton of choices in terms of places to go if you had that kind of a problem.
Absolutely.
Anyway, they reached out to ACLJ. The ACLJ got involved, the school backed off. What I wanted to tell the audience is don't be afraid to ask ACLJ for help if you see this stuff happening with your school. Logan's not just saying that. They don't charge for their services, and they are willing to help. If it's something where there is actually an issue, they are willing to help.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, for giving your firsthand response, and we appreciate your support over the years as well. Obviously, we personally appreciate all the work that you've done, and when you have something like this, when you do go back 15, 20 years with now people who are adults, who are kids, and they're seeing the issues. And the problem is a lot of these things, like I said, she had a Bible study. We were able to take care of it then because it was already even settled law 15 years ago. Why? Because we took it to the Supreme Court in the early 90s.
Because your dad won the case.
Right.
Right.
Won the case in the early 90s. But still, 30 years later, that was like 91. 30 years later, maybe not quite 91, but early 90s. We are able to look at it, and there's still uninformed people who are running these schools who need to be taught the facts of what the law is, because this is all settled law. And we appreciate Carolyn calling in and talking about that. And again, the services are free, but they're free because of people like you who support the work. So again, we're in the middle of a matching challenge. Not in the middle. We are towards the very end of a matching challenge at aclj.org, which again means there's someone on the other end who says, if you give $10, I'm going to match them at $10.
The Mergens case was 1990. So you're
1990, so I was close. Maybe the was the decision.
Oh.
You know what?
You got me.
I know. Yeah, probably.
I just did a quick search.
Yeah, the case was in 1990. And look, Bridget Mergens, who's now she was pretty much an adult by the time it got to the Supreme Court. We still hear from her from time to time. And because of people like her and her parents and people who are involved, we are still able to keep the school boards and everyone informed when there's issues like this arise. And when necessary, we take them to court. And we have lawyers on staff, some you see and a lot you don't. When Carolyn said Jay Sekulow was the only choice, that's because in the early 90s, he was pretty much it. There's a handful of other people. Now, obviously, we have people literally around the entire planet working on these type of issues for kids in America, for kids in everywhere you can imagine. Some we can say, some we can't. And that's because of the work at the ACLJ. Let's take a couple more calls before we wrap up. Some specifically dealing with what was going on with Iran, how things have changed. Let's go to first Karen in Georgia. Great state of Georgia. Karen.
Hello.
Hello. You're on the air.
Okay. My question was about why is this such an issue with the Democrats? Is it just because the Abraham Accords were brought about by Trump? Is that why they don't want to really go with this? And the Iran thing, we can prove that this has not worked in the past. Why won't they go along with this?
Sure. Maybe we go to Than for this. Than, I do want to push as much as we can. And look, this is maybe true for Republicans and Democrats. They want to disassociate themselves with good or bad policy that comes from either one of the parties. This is where we are. We are so divided at this point that if the Trump administration had a successful thing happen, we have to undo it just because it's got his name attached to it.
It's pretty outlandish, isn't it, Logan, that you would have one of our strongest allies around the world and maybe the most important region in the world make peace deals with other neighboring countries, and the next administration would be opposed to it and want to undo it just because of who did it. I will say I think there's another layer here, though, Logan, because remember, the original JCPOA deal was the Obama-Biden administration policy. So, look, even before President Trump came on board, I do think that's probably a factor in them looking to undo it. But this was proactively their position, this position of appeasement and leading from behind around the world. So I think it's a very natural pivot back to them. The problem is, no matter how natural it is, Logan, it's very detrimental to American interests.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that, all seen that the in general, the policy changes, and that's not just with what's going on in the Middle East. We've now seen it at the border. We've seen it across the board. The idea that we have to abandon successful programs of any administration just due to their political differences is kind of a sad state of where we are.
Yeah, it really is. And, we run the risk with the new Biden administration of making our other allies in the region feel disenfranchised, if not even betrayed. For example, in this whole change of administrations, the Biden administration has paused the sale of our F-35 fighter planes to the United Arab Emirates. They need those planes to defend themselves against a hostile Iran. We've also paused weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, which is the chief enemy of Iran in the region. And so it looks like we're not only hedging, not only are hedging on our commitment to Israel, we're hedging on some of our key Arab allies in the region in order to somehow, placate Iran or
who are doing a lot. Those countries are trying. They're trying to mend fences. They are trying to bring in people from Israel. I mean, UAE and Dubai had like the biggest Hanukkah celebration you've ever seen this year because they are trying. One, they know the tourist money could be humongous. I mean, that's just true. And also to try to settle down that region. We saw great success in that in the last 4 years. And it's sad to see that we're quickly right back to dealing with this type of situation.
Well, you also saw the positivity of the Abraham Accords. You saw movement in other areas as well. You saw the strength of the Trump administration by taking out Qasem Soleimani and other terrorist actors with the Iranian regime. And then what happens now? We have what the doctrine of consensus that we see. That's what Rick Grinnell says often on this show, that's what the Biden administration wants. They want consensus among people instead of having a cohesive strategy themselves. And you see other nations having to take up the slack, like Israel, and they are now having to actively defend their interests because the United States, they're not so certain is on their side right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you all for joining us for this discussion. I think we've had a pretty informative show for a lot of you, and I hope it informed me, hope it informed you as well. Thanks to Wes, thanks to Than, thanks to Will for joining us today on Sekulow. We've had a good time, but I want to tell you, that hard work needs your support. And like I said, if you have a legal need, guess what? We're always here for those specific, obviously if it's within our realm, don't call us for certain things, but there's other lawyers for those things. But if it's within the American Center for Law and Justice, the AClj scope, we are here for you at no cost. The only way that exists is because all of our lawyers have to be paid. All the staff has to be paid. These are not volunteers. We are working hard for you. But that is because we have offices around the globe because of supporters like you. And what you can do right now as we head towards the end of a matching challenge, go to aclj.org. Donate. Again, whatever you give gets doubled effectively, which is really important right now. And if you're on social media, a really great free way to do it, like hit that thumbs up on YouTube, share, subscribe, do all those things that gets the word out about what we're doing here at Sekulow and the ACLJ. We'll talk to you tomorrow.